Thank you, David. My question for the panel is whether Australia is being complacent with the AUKUS arrangement, and what does this mean for the potential for China to invade Taiwan? Would America provide effective strategy to stop a potential conflict?
Hugh White, let me go to you first on this. You've just written a quarterly essay about some of these very issues.
Yes, thanks, David, and thanks for the question. Look, I think we are being complacent. I think we're being complacent about the risk of war between the US and China over Taiwan. I think it's higher than most other people do, and that's because I think it's harder to deter China from taking military action against Taiwan. And that's because I think it's harder for America to win a war over Taiwan. And is therefore more likely that the leaders in Beijing will calculate that it's worth their risk to have a go. Moreover, I don't think AUKUS is going to help us much on that, primarily because at the very best, the submarines that the core of the AUKUS deal won't be delivered in any numbers that are strategically significant until the 2050s. And that's 30 years from now. Now, the strategic contest between America and China, which is transforming Asia at the moment, is going to be over long before then. And so I think we're being complacent in thinking that that AUKUS helps us in addressing that broader strategic question. I think we're also being complacent in thinking that it deals with the challenge we have in replacing our present submarines.
Well, I think the government is talking more about the 2040s than the 2050s, but either way, I take your point on that. Isn't your contention more, though, that AUKUS itself and the Quad, all of these sort of alliances and relationships with some of our old friends is not necessarily the best way to go for Australia?
Just on the subs, the first submarine arrives in 2040, yes. But one submarine's not a capability.
Correct.
Any more than one chopstick is an eating implement. You know, you need 6.
No, I take your point.
Look, on the broader point, look, right at the heart of this, and the issue about Taiwan, the issues we're seeing in the South China Sea, there's something much bigger, even than Taiwan, underlying those. And this is which is going to be the primary power in East Asia for the remainder of this century. That's one of the biggest questions that Australia's ever faced. And my concern is that we've slipped into the feeling that Australia should be willing to go to war with China, to support America in going to war with China, in order to prevent it taking America's place as the primary power in East Asia. Now, I would much rather that China didn't take America's place, but I don't think going to war with China to stop it is going to work, because I don't think that's a war we can win.
Peter Khalil, is that what this is about? Is that what Australia's doing, preparing to go to war with China?
Well, David, first on AUKUS, I was very critical of the previous government because not only did they botch the relationship with France and President Macron, but they left us with a capability gap of 25 years. Now, you know, they made an assumption that the current Collins-class boat, which will be about 50 years old by 2040, could be retrofitted or refitted and somehow be the capability we need to protect our maritime environment. And my question is, what kind of regional superiority do we get out of a refitted 50-year-old submarine? Is it regional superiority over Easter Island? And they didn't have an answer for that. So Richard Marles, our Defence Minister, is now looking at all the options because he's right. The first boats, the subs, come out in the 2040s, the mid-2040s, but there's still 25 years until then. On Taiwan, I have great respect for Hugh, and he makes an elegant argument and analysis, but once it sort of leaves a test tube of the academic paper into the real world, it starts to break down because there's a couple of assumptions that Hugh makes that need to be really called out. And the first is the assumption that Xi Jinping will take this action of using a military force to invade Taiwan, when there is a real underestimation of the massive impact it will have not only on the global economy of such action, but on China's economy. It would be catastrophic. And they also have elements within the Chinese Communist Party who would resist such an action. All the gains that China's made economically and with regard to its prosperity over decades would be put at risk. And secondly, even if he does roll the dice and takes that action, we have seen that the same commentators and analysts who are saying that Ukraine would collapse within 72 hours in the face of the might of the giant Russian military have been proven wrong. And those same analysts have been saying the same about Taiwan, that they would fall relatively quickly. Whereas Taiwan is an island of 25 million people, the size of Netherlands. It's armed to the teeth. It is defending itself, and it is very unlikely, in my view, that it would fall relatively quickly.
Kylie Moore-Gilbert, what's your thoughts on that? And back to Vishan's question, which is about AUKUS and whether, I guess, that is a good arrangement for Australia to be part of, and whether it's an effective vehicle or strategy to stop conflict in Taiwan.
I mean, I don't really know that much about submarines per se, but on the subject of Taiwan, I read Hugh's essay and I thought it was really instructive and really interesting. But I do believe you said perhaps that we should come out and be clear to Taiwan that we're not prepared to go to war militarily to defend them. And I actually, I was struck by that, looking at Ukraine and looking at the fact that it was very clear before Russia invaded Ukraine that the US and NATO would not intervene militarily and support the Ukrainians, and whether or not that had an impact on triggering the Russian attack to begin with. Considering Taiwan, I think retaining a measure of strategic ambiguity is probably useful. If the Chinese don't know if NATO or the US or even Australia or anybody would actually step up and help Taiwan in the event of an invasion, perhaps that might restrain them and act as a brake on any plans that they might have in that space.
Well, Ambassador Myroshnychenko, let me ask you, what are the lessons from what's happening in your country, in Ukraine, for this situation in Taiwan?
Look, many people make a comparison, but I think they cannot be compared, Ukraine and Taiwan, for one reason. Australia, as well as most of other countries, recognize one China policy.
That's right.
So Ukraine, as a sovereign nation, we're independent. We've been actually a founding member of the United Nations, and we've been now invaded by Russia. Taiwan is a different case, but I think you should look actually at the political economy, because the biggest importer of Chinese products is America. China is the biggest investor in its treasury bonds. So the interdependence between China and America is at such a high level that it would be destructive for them to go at war, actually. Now, what's the role of China in terms of Russia's invasion of Ukraine? And as you have been observing, the No Limits partnership, which was announced at the beginning of the Olympic Games in Beijing, this is very interesting to see, because we understand that a lot will depend on China. And actually, in the case of Russians coming into Kazakhstan earlier this year, if you noted, all Russian troops left Kazakhstan after the call of Xi to Vladimir Putin. So we understand that China can really play a role, and China is not benefiting from this war. They're benefiting geopolitically, but at the same of the day, they have the largest population, the prices for commodities have surged, and China is the biggest importer of commodities in the world. So I think it's important for China to understand that it's not in their interest to prop up Russia too much. And because Russia does not depend on the West as much as China depends on the West. So I think this is very clear, and I want China to understand it, and I hope they do.